China has emerged as Russia's top oil buyer, snapping up over 100 million tons in 2024, more than any other country. But it's getting a bargain, paying $6 to $8 less per barrel than the market price for Russia's Urals crude. This isn't just a matter of quality or cost differences. It's the fallout of sanctions and restrictions that have locked Russia out of Western markets. Beijing holds the upper hand, and Moscow has few options left. In return, Russia gets no security guarantees or access to cutting-edge technology. While China once bought Russian weapon systems, the tables have turned. Now, it's Russia scrambling for Chinese electronics, software and components, items Beijing isn't exactly eager to share. On the surface, this looks like a partnership of equals, joint military drills, anti-Western rhetoric, and talk of a no-limits alliance. But dig deeper, and it's clear Russia is little more than a raw materials supplier, while China calls the shots on trade terms. For Beijing, this isn't just about energy. It's a long-term play, securing resources, expanding influence, and controlling key routes and infrastructure. For Russia, it's a relationship born of necessity, not choice. The invasion of Ukraine adds another layer to this dynamic. It's not just a bid to challenge the West. Some analysts see it as a desperate move to regain strategic leverage before Russia's reliance on China becomes a point of no return. Today, Russia's future isn't being shaped in Brussels or Washington, it's being decided in Beijing. On paper, Russia and China are strategic partners. In reality, one side dominates. In 2024, their bilateral trade hit a record $245 billion. But by the first quarter of 2025, cracks were showing. Trade dropped by nearly 7%, and the flow of key commodities, oil and gas, shifted to terms less favorable to Moscow. Chinese refineries scaled back purchases, and Russian firms struggled with payment issues. Beijing publicly backs Moscow, but quietly calls the shots. It controls not just logistics, but also currency and payment systems. Transactions are settled in yuan through Chinese financial institutions, safely beyond Western sanctions and Kremlin influence. This isn't partnership, it's economic dependence. The trade structure is increasingly lopsided. Russia exports raw materials, oil, gas, metals, while importing electronics, machinery, and components it could source more cheaply elsewhere, if not for its isolation. Between January and May this year, aluminum exports to China surged by over 50%, copper by 66%, and nickel doubled. Impressive figures, but they reveal Moscow's reliance on a single buyer. Internationally, the partnership's shine is fading. Joint military exercises are at an all-time high, over 60 in 2025 alone, but Beijing treads carefully, offering no clear support for Russia's actions in Ukraine. At the 2023 Shanghai Cooperation Organization Summit, not a single word of endorsement was spoken. No joint declarations, no bold initiatives, just polite gestures. Meanwhile, China is making inroads into regions Moscow once considered its backyard. In Central Asia, Beijing funds roads, railways, and resource deals. Russia still has military bases and old ties, but its real influence is slipping. Kazakhstan and Tajikistan now look to Beijing, not Moscow, for leadership. The rhetoric of a no-limits friendship rings hollow. Limits exist, and they're drawn by Beijing. A decade ago, the United States set the global agenda. The dollar reigned supreme, and American aircraft carriers enforced order. But that order is crumbling. For the first time since World War II, US federal debt has exceeded 130% of GDP, a result of years of borrowing, compounded by recent crises. In 2024, the budget deficit neared $2 trillion, and the dollar's value slid 10% in the first half of 2025. America's role as a global security guarantor is also shrinking. Its military presence is more selective, and internal divisions hamper decisive action. In a world that abhors a vacuum, Beijing is stepping in to rewrite the rules. China doesn't need to outcompete the US. It's simply taking its place. It's building alternative financial, trade, and infrastructure systems. The yuan is gaining ground in settlements across Africa, South America, and Asia. Payment systems, tech standards, and investments no longer revolve around the dollar or America. Resources are key to this shift. China controls most of the world's rare earth metals, critical for batteries, electronics, and weapons. In 2025, it slashed exports, citing environmental concerns. Unofficially, it's a power play, turning resources into leverage. At the same time, China is doubling down on technology. Billions are pouring into AI, solar energy, 6G networks, and cybersecurity. The Made in China 2025 initiative isn't just about prototypes, it's about dominating global markets and setting standards. In this new world order, Russia isn't a partner, it's a supplier. It gets no access to these technologies or favorable terms for resources. Its role is to provide cheap energy and serve as a market for Chinese goods. The West is losing ground, but that doesn't mean Russia is gaining. Instead, it's being pulled into the orbit of a power that offers control, not alliance. The real question is, can Russia break free?
On the surface, the relationship looks familiar. Joint military exercises, courteous summits, and declarations of partnership. But in reality, China has not only dominated trade with Russia, it is steadily taking over the political and strategic roles Moscow once reserved for itself. This shift is most evident in Central Asia. A decade ago, Russia set the rules in the region, diplomatically, militarily, and culturally. Today, it is just one player among many. Beijing is gaining control, not through force, but through investments and institutions. It builds roads, railways, and power plants, strengthens currency cooperation, and offers loans and access to its technological standards. For Kazakhstan, Uzbekistan, or Kyrgyzstan, this presents a tangible alternative, more stable than Moscow's patronage. Russia, meanwhile, struggles to counter this drift. It lacks the resources or competitive offers to match China's. Even in Siberia, a region critical to its interests, Russia is increasingly ceding control over key infrastructure. More critically, it is losing its role as a transit hub. The Trans-Siberian Railway was once the backbone of trade between Asia and Europe. Now China bypasses Russia via the so-called Middle Corridor, running through Kazakhstan, the Caspian Sea, the Caucasus, and Turkey. In 2023 alone, cargo volume on this route surged by over 80%, while flows through Russia plummeted by half. Russia is thus being sidelined, both in its border regions and in the broader Eurasian system. But the real issue isn't geography, it's the growing asymmetry. Beijing doesn't need Moscow to achieve its ambitions. It can replace it. Moscow, however, has no other path. The economic disparity tells the story. In 2025, China's GDP surpassed $18 trillion, while Russia's hovers around $2 trillion. This gap isn't narrowing, it's widening. Russia isn't closing the distance, it's becoming ever more dependent on its stronger partner. The technological divide is growing too. China's dominance in artificial intelligence, electronic components, drones, and telecommunications leaves Russia with no strategic leverage to bring to the partnership. It must buy, it must adapt, and increasingly it's denied even that access. Here lies the greatest threat. Power today isn't determined by armies or alliances, but by the ability to act independently. China isn't occupying Russia, but it is methodically eroding its capacity for autonomous decision-making. not through aggression, but through the relentless pursuit of its own interests, without sentiment.
Russia has long resisted playing second fiddle to anyone, East or West. But its economic, technological, and demographic realities no longer support strategic independence. Moscow faces a stark choice: reliance on China or the West. Both come with a price. China seems the safer bet at first glance. It doesn't criticize Russia's political system, demand reforms, or impose ideological conditions. But it offers little in return, only a market for goods and growing control over infrastructure, currency, and technology. Russia buys short-term relief at the cost of its long-term autonomy. The West, by contrast, is demanding, but offers something Beijing cannot: access to capital, expertise, and technological systems, plus a cultural framework where Russia still has roots. Before 2014, over 50% of Russia's exports went to the West, mainly the EU. Today, it's under 20%. Moscow severed ties with the system that fueled its prosperity for decades. The 2022 invasion of Ukraine wasn't just aggression. It was an attempt to force a reset with the West on better terms. The Kremlin believed military might could bring Europe and the US back to the table, not as a defeated party, but as a player setting new rules. Over time, tentative dialogues emerged, through back channels and at summits in Riyadh and London. But the West wasn't open to geopolitical concessions. Instead of restoring pre-2014 ties, it offered conditional normalization, limited economic cooperation in exchange for troop withdrawal, respect for Ukraine's sovereignty, and internal reforms. For Moscow, this was a tough pill to swallow. Security guarantees were shaky, and the stakes, both in image and strategy, were high. Without a major policy shift, the West's offer was an empty gesture, unable to break Russia's isolation. The dilemma remains. China offers immediate stability but growing dependence. The West demands painful reforms but holds the key to long-term modernization. Which path leads to recovery, and which to permanent subordination? The alliance between Russia and China looks solid on paper, but the reality tells a different story. China isn't an ally by choice, it's a partner of necessity. Russia needs markets, technology, and capital. Beijing provides just enough to keep things going, nothing more. With each passing year, this dependence deepens. Meanwhile, the West, despite its skepticism and demands, remains the only real path to modernization. If Moscow embraced the tough road of reform, it could avoid becoming a vassal to either East or West. But that would mean abandoning imperial ambitions and accepting a role as a regional power. The invasion of Ukraine was a bid to reshape that role through force. It backfired. Instead of a new security framework, Russia got isolation. And by leaning on Beijing as its primary partner, it's only hastening its own subordination. In this geopolitical chess game, Russia isn't the player, it's the pawn. The question isn't who will save it, but who will ultimately call the shots.
Thank you for watching this episode. If you found it interesting, please subscribe to the channel and leave a comment with your thoughts. Your support helps us dive deeper into topics like these. See you in the next video.